This is the RTX 4080. And before you get mad about it, no, I did not spend my money on it. And no, NVIDIA did not send it to me for free for review. And no, I don't support NVIDIA's pricing of the RTX 4080. Actually, the story is a lot cooler than that. You see, I have a subscriber who contacted me and said, hey, look, I like your content. I want to support your content. I want to see you succeed. So here's a 4080 on me. Now, I do have to send it back once I'm done with it, but he took a complete chance on me. Eternal, thank you so much for your support and taking a gamble on me and helping me make this video, because honestly, without you, this video literally would not be happening at all. I've had people support me, but never on this level, and this is honestly a dream come true, somebody wanting to help me with my content. So thank you so much. I really appreciate that. Even though a 4080 was sent to me for free, I'm gonna try and remain completely objective as possible when talking about this card. But now let's go ahead and talk about the title of the video. Should you buy a RTX 4080? Well, the short version is yes, but not at the MSRP. Not at the MSRP. I don't support NVIDIA's MSRP of $1199. I do think $1,200 is overpriced for the 4080. Wait to buy. Am I making myself clear here? Because you see, I made an entire video called Why the RTX 4080 is so overpriced. And yet in my last video, I made one little comment at the very end of the video, and then ultimately it said buy a 4080, and everyone lost their minds. So let me make this abundantly clear. Don't buy a 4080 at the MSRP of $1,200. Wait to buy and let the prices come down. Oh, and let me take it a step further. It's not just the 4080. The 7900 XTX is not worth $1,000. You should wait to buy that as well. Oh, and the 7900 XT is a complete ripoff. It is AMD's version of the RTX 4080 12GB model. It is a complete ripoff. Don't buy that crap until it's like $500 or $600 tops. That's my opinion. The 4080 is a phenomenal card. It is. But $1,200 is quite frankly just too much money for it. It's $500 over what the 3080 launched at, and it supersedes the overall cost of inflation. If you factor in inflation, the 4080 should cost more than the 3080, and it does perform a lot better than the 3080. So there is an argument there to say that the 4080 should be more expensive than $699 USD. However, $1,200 is really pushing it. At what point does profit and capitalism turn into price gouging? And I think that's a fair question. So yes, consider buying the 4080, but not at the $1,200 MSRP. So let me start off by talking about the externals of this card specifically. This is the MSI Ventus3x 16GB. I mean, they're all 16GB, right? In my area, I have 2 micro centers. I'm incredibly fortunate. This is the most common card. It is the cheapest card available in my area, and I think I know why. This card has no RGB. It doesn't even have any type of LED lighting, not even a basic LED lighting strip at all. There's no dual BIOS or anything like that. That's not to say it's bad. I mean, those things are kind of subjective anyway. I'm just saying those things don't exist on this card if you're interested in that. Now, the other thing I'll say about a 4080 in general is that these cards are absolutely massive. They're big cards. I thought this card was big, okay? This card is big. This is my RTX 3080 on a Corsair water block. Admittedly, the water block makes it smaller, but still, there's a 3080 that I was using in my system, and this is the RTX 4080 that was sent to me. Now look at this. The 4080s are gigantic cards, and the crazy thing about it is they only get bigger from here. I thought this was big, but no. You wait until you see my next video. I'll put a picture on the screen right now. You just wait until my next video. Now, of course, we have to talk about the controversial connector. As you can see, this thing is not pretty at all. This is incredibly ugly. It's very ugly. I mean, there's no way around it. It's ugly. I will say this, whenever you plug in your 8-pin connectors on the end here, there is a nice and clean and very obvious clip or click whenever you plug it in, so you know you've made contact. However, here at the bottom at the source where it really matters, whenever you plug the cable in, there is no click of any kind. There's really no way of knowing you've put the cable all the way in. And so you really just have to push until, well, you can't push anymore, basically. I don't like doing things like that personally, but That is something you have to be mindful of if you do decide to buy a 4080, a 4090, or any other card in the future that requires this connector. Okay, but now let's talk about performance. I mean, at the end of the day, that's really what we're all here for, right? Who cares what the card looks like? We want to talk about how the card performs. Yes, I will compare the 4080 to other cards in the future. Stay tuned for that. Get subscribed so you don't miss it. But for today, we will compare the 4080 to the 3080. I will put my test bench specifications on the screen right now so you can see the exact hardware I'm using for all of these testing scenarios. And we will start off with rasterization, move into a little bit of ray tracing, and finish up with overclocking and frame generation. And now, without any further ado, let's go ahead and talk about gaming performance on the RTX 4080. Starting things off with Fortnite performance preset at 4K, the RTX 4080 is averaging 491 FPS, and the 3080 only averages 354 FPS. That is over 100 FPS difference at 4K with the performance mode, and so that is nothing short of impressive. And if you want to take it a step further, look at the 4080's average frame rate at 4K and compare it to the 3080's average frame rate at every other resolution. Even at the lowest resolution on the chart at 1080p, the 4080 at 4K is still averaging more frames than the RTX 3080 can at 1080p. I know it's Fortnite, I know it's the performance mode, but wow, to me, that is impressive. Next up is Forza Horizon 5 using the Extreme preset, and this also has ray tracing built into the preset. At 4K, the RTX 4080 averages 130 FPS, while the RTX 3080 only averages 83 FPS. And at 1440p, the gap seems to widen even more. The 4080 averages 168 FPS, while the 3080 only averages 105 FPS. Lastly, at 1080p, the 4080 comes in just shy of 200 FPS with a 197 FPS average, and the 3080 only averages 119 FPS. Next up is Halo Infinite using the Ultra preset, and at 4K, the 4080 averages 126 FPS, and the 3080 only averages 85 FPS. And the thing here that really stood out to me is that the 1% low of the 4080 is actually higher than the average frame rate of the 3080 at the 4K resolution. That is impressive. And at 1440p, the 4080 is a monster, pulling in 202 FPS, and the 3080 is at 132 FPS. And finally, at 1080p, the 4080 averages 269 FPS, while the 3080 only averages 169 FPS. That is 100 frames on average of a difference between these two cards. Wow. Next up is Spider-Man Miles Morales using the very high preset. Now, this game is a pretty good test of what these cards can do. At 4K, the 4080 averages 116 FPS, while the 3080 only averages 73 FPS. And once again, we have a situation where the 1% lows of the 4080 are still higher than the overall average of the 3080 at 4K. And at 1440p, the 4080 averages 165 FPS, while the 3080 only averages 127 FPS. And finally, at 1080p, the gap closes significantly with the 3080 just behind the 4080. The 4080 averages 172 FPS, while the 3080 averages 163 FPS. And the reason for this is because typically at 1080p, you are more CPU bound than GPU bound, and Spider-Man is known to be a very CPU intensive game. Next up is Overwatch 2 using the Ultra preset. At 4K, the 4080 averages 449 FPS, while the 3080 only averages 118 FPS. It is a complete bloodbath at 4K in this title. And at 1440p, the 4080 averages 457 FPS, and the 3080 takes a nice jump up to 214 FPS. And finally, at 1080p, the 4080 almost maxes out the in-game frame rate limit at 575 FPS on average, average, while the 3080 averages 303 FPS. And lastly, for our core rasterization benchmarks, we have Warzone 2 on the balance preset. At 4K, the 4080 averages 128 FPS and the 3080 averages 90 FPS. At 1440p, the 4080 averages 196 FPS and the 3080 averages 130 FPS. And finally, at 1080p, the 4080 averages 213 FPS and the 3080 averages 167 FPS. Now let's move over and talk about the overclocking performance of the RTX 4080. Up to this point, you have seen out of the box standard performance with the 4080, which is basically an average of around 2700 megahertz. I was able to overclock the card all the way up to 3 gigahertz, but the problem is it is only stable in some games. And so some games will be locked at 3 gigahertz while other games are fluctuating at a 2900 plus megahertz range, and I will have those depicted on the chart. Okay, and the first game up is Fortnite once again, and I was able to overclock it to 3 gigahertz and it was completely stable for me. And this is the performance preset. And as you can see, the stock average at 4K is 491 FPS, but with the 3 gigahertz overclock, we're able to average 529 FPS. That is absolutely awesome. We also saw a very nice performance increase in our 1% lows, going from 155 FPS all the way up to 195 FPS. Halo Infinite is not as impressive. We only take a small increase from 126 FPS up to 130 FPS, and this was not able to be locked at 3 gigahertz, so I was able to boost this up to 2900 plus megahertz. A similar story with Spider-Man Miles Morales. We went from 80 to 82 FPS, but please note Spider-Man Miles Morales and Spider-Man Remastered can both hold a 3 gigahertz locked clock speed on the RTX 4080. And lastly, in Warzone 2, once again, it could not hold a 3 gigahertz clock speed, but once again, we could hover at the 2.9 gigahertz range or 2900 plus megahertz range, and it ran totally fine. Our average frame rate using the stock speed is 128 FPS, but using the overclock, we're able to get it up to 147 FPS. But now it's time to talk about ray tracing, and I only have one game to show off here, but I think that's all I need. Using Spider-Man Miles Morales on the very high preset, no frame generation, no DLSS of any kind, ray tracing turned on, shadows set to medium, and reflection set to high. At 4K, the 4080 averages 80 FPS, but the 3080 only averages 41 FPS. So the 4080 almost natively doubles the ray tracing performance of the 3080 at 4K. At 1440p, the gap isn't so wide. The 3080 averages 75 FPS, while the 4080 is only at 87 FPS, so the gap is a lot closer there. And finally, at 1080p, the 4080 averages 88 FPS, while the 3080 averages 83 FPS. And for my last graph here, we're gonna talk about frame generation. So Spider-Man Miles Morales, very high preset, overclocked to 3 gigahertz, DLSS off, ray tracing on, shadow set to medium, and reflection set to high, 4K native versus 4K frame generation, and we have only the 4080 as a comparison here. So with a 4080 stock average at 80 FPS and the 4080 overclocked average at 82 FPS, when we enable frame generation, our stock average increases to 113 FPS and our overclocked average increases to 118 FPS. Frame generation definitely makes a big improvement here in terms of overall frame rate averages, even with ray tracing turned on. Okay, look, that was a ton of data and it was my first time doing charts. So if you like the charts, do me a favor, hit that like button because it goes a long way in helping me out. If there's something I can improve on the charts, let me know in the comment section down below. I think the RTX 4080 is a phenomenal card, and overall, I do recommend it, but not at the MSRP of $1199. It's not worth that amount of money. It is overpriced. It just is. And so if you can wait, please wait. Obviously, I'm talking about prices from an American perspective. I'm in America. So if you're outside of America, the prices will be completely different for you. And the only thing I can say for you is that look at the $11.99 MSRP of the US dollar, make the conversion to your currency and say, okay, that's what I should pay here in my market. And then wait for the price to go below that and then consider it as a buy. And outside of the pricing, the card is phenomenal. And my favorite feature about the card, honestly, is the frame generation. I've had a lot of issues with DLSS, and I think I've been quite vocal about that here on the channel. When you turn on DLSS and it lowers your resolution, you're not playing at native anymore, and it tries to re-upscale it, sometimes you can definitely see the difference in that. But with frame generation, I was beyond impressed with it. AMD's already confirmed they're working on their version of frame generation. And so I definitely think there's a lot of potential in this technology. And so honestly, for me, that is my favorite feature of the RTX 4080 so far. Drop a comment down below letting me know what you think about the RTX 4080. And now that the 7900 XTX is out and kind of let us all down, are you considering a 4080 more than before? I'm kind of curious to know your thoughts on that. Thank you, Eternal, again for this card. I really appreciate it. This video would not have been possible without you. That's all I got. Thanks for hanging out with me. And until next time, E-Rock out.